Good evening. My name is Kirsten Griebel, and as chairman of Simsbury Citizens First, I want to thank everyone for attending the third in our series of debates with the candidates. We've organized these debates as part of our continuing effort to bring the issues to the citizens of Simsbury. I'd like to thank the 4 candidates for the 16th District State Representative race for participating again this evening. We will use the same format for tonight's debate that we used in the September 18th debate, but we are reversing the order in which the candidates speak. The debate will begin with 3 minutes for opening remarks by each candidate, followed by a set of questions with each candidate's response limited to 2 minutes, and then 3 minutes for closing remarks. About halfway through the debate, we will take a brief 5-minute break. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Susan Raff, who is WFSB Channel 3 Eyewitness News reporter. Emmy-nominated Susan Raff has covered the state capitol for the past 5 years for WFSB, and she spends about half the year covering both state and local elections. Before Susan joined the Eyewitness News team in 1995, she was an investigative reporter at a television station in Hartford and a business reporter in Albany, New York. Susan is active in the community, and which she currently serves as the honorary chairwoman for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. She's also a fundraiser for the American Diabetes Association and the Susan B. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation, as well as a marathon runner. In addition to moderating tonight's debate, Susan is moderating a debate between David Cappiello and Chris Murphy, the 2 candidates for U.S. Representative from the 5th Congressional District of Connecticut, on Monday, October 20th at 10:30 a.m. at the 4 Point Sheraton in Meriden. That debate is being sponsored by the AARP and is open to the public. I'd like to thank SCTV for the help in filming and airing these debates on SCTV Channel 5. And you can also view all 3 debates on their website at www.simsburytv.org. So if you can now make sure you all have your cell phones turned off. And again, tonight, please, no applause or cheering or extraneous comments during the debate in order to allow our candidates the full opportunity to speak. I'll now turn it over to Susan. Thank you.
I want to thank Kirsten Griebel for allowing me this opportunity to come out here. I can't think of a better time to be involved in politics. We have such an exciting presidential election, and as I understand, this might be one of the first times, or the only time, that you've had 4 candidates vying for the 16th district here as a state rep. So it shows you that there certainly is an apathy going on right now, and people are very excited about politics and are very interested in learning who their representatives are. And the goal, obviously, of the debate, as you know, is to understand where the candidates stand, get a little chance to understand them and learn tonight, and hopefully we'll do that. And since we do have 4 candidates, I don't want to waste any time because we all have things to do later on, obviously, so we want to hear from the candidates right away. We want to introduce them. The incumbent is Linda Scofield. She is a Democrat who was elected in 2006. The Republican challenger is Rob Heahney. He held this office for 8 years before losing to Scofield 2 years ago. Our next candidate is Bob Kalechman. He is the petitioning candidate and a retired veteran. And finally, Deborah Noble. She is from the Working Families candidate. This is an independent statewide party that focuses on affordable health care and jobs and taxes. Each candidate will have 3 minutes tonight to begin their opening statements. And we will start with Ms. Noble, then Mr. Kalechman, then Ms. Scofield, and then Mr. Heahney. So let us begin.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening. My name is Deborah Noble, and I am the Working Families Party candidate for state representative here in the 16th District. I'd like to thank Simsbury Citizens First for hosting the debates, and thank all of you for attending the debates. Much has changed in our country and in Connecticut since our last debate last month in September. I know it's the hope of parents and grandparents to leave a better world, a better place for our children and our grandchildren. We want to leave a more solid legacy for future generations to inherit. However, recent events with the stock market and the economy, they've taken a roller coaster ride, and our economic outlook, while it seems dismal, and many financial analysts have disavowed any sort of quick economic recovery. Congress and legislative bodies around the world have infused the global market and the world economy with funds, but to what end? I feel sure that we'll be able to survive this economic crisis but not by continuing with business as usual. We need to stop throwing money at a system that has not continued to evolve with the times and is not working for everyone. For example, we continually negotiate and renegotiate contracts with insurance companies in order to provide health care to residents. That approach works for some, but not for all. How about if perhaps we negotiate comprehensive health plans with the medical professionals who actually provide the services to the individuals for a change, instead of a middleman who's only out to make money? That's why I'm running for office, because I'm not afraid to work and think outside the box. We need a brave approach because we are entering a brave new world. It's not going to be business as usual anymore, and I'm ready for that change. I hope you are too. Thank you.
Mr. Kalechman?
Thank you. Let me thank the Simsbury Citizen First Party, the Town Library, and the Simsbury Cable Television for making this debate possible. I'd like to take this opportunity to explain in detail why the citizens of Simsbury should vote for me on Election Day, Tuesday, November 4th, 2008. For far too long, Simsbury and its citizens have not been represented by the Democratic incumbent. She has put her party and friends first, and the citizens of Simsbury last. On numerous occasions, her election promises have not been kept. Allow me to mention a few in view of the time limits. The Democratic Party majority voted to tax you in the form of a conveyance tax. Fact. She voted to cut off all debate regarding tax increases. The Democratic incumbent, Ms. Scofield, opposed the Governor Rell and the State Traffic Commission banning and closing of Avon Mountain to heavy truck traffic over 26,000 pounds due to the untimely deaths which were occurring on the Avon Mountain Route 44 over the last 2 years. She allied herself with the Motor Transport Association of Connecticut, self-interest in trying to embarrass our governor and her administration. Here again, Ms. Scofield used her position to make the Avon Mountain tragedy a political football. Her party rejected House Bill number 439, which would have automatically authorized a pilot program for automatic traffic enforcement devices on Route 44 in Avon and West Hartford. It was tabled in the Transportation Committee to avoid a House vote. This committee was controlled by the Democratic Party. It is time that the political parties, both Democrat and Republican, represent the citizens of Simsbury and not their political parties. I'd like to leave you with one thought by quoting you John Donne. For whom the bell tolls, for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee.
Ms. Scofield?
Thanks to Simsbury Citizens First also for hosting us. I'd like to start by letting you all know that I have a website, www.lindascofield.org, and all of the answers to the questions that SCF has asked are on my website, my answers. And there's also a tab on that website, Myths. And under Myths, you can find my response to false accusations like that I voted for the conveyance tax, which I did not. And I did send Mr. Kalechman the voting record from that so that he could correct that. I'd like to thank the voters of Simsbury also for giving me the honor of letting me represent the town. With my experience as a nurse, as an executive in the health field, as the director of the state's Medicaid program, as a small business owner, and as an active volunteer in town, I bring a lot of experience to my role in the legislature. Given my track record of achievements in my first 2 years getting numerous bills passed as well as additional funding for Simsbury. I hope that Simsbury voters will recognize my commitment to the job and my qualifications and return me to the office. The next 2 years will be a challenging economy. We have to spend smarter to protect the programs that matter the most and yield the most benefit to our citizens. Here are my 6 goals for the next 2 years. Number 1, stimulate our economy through business development, such as the enabling legislation we passed in the last term to allow captive insurance to be sold, and the promotion of nanotechnology and fuel cell research. Number 2, continue to be responsive to constituents who need help solving problems or getting information. Number 3, work towards better access to affordable health benefits. Given my 30-year career in healthcare, I have a lot to offer here. My comprehensive health reform initiative, the only one that was endorsed by the business community, includes market-based approaches that can hold down insurance costs and provide more options to people who can't afford them now. I'll also secure the passage of my ConPace Plus program, which provides better benefits to seniors. 4, fight for funds for our educational system. 5, protect Simsbury's open spaces and our environment. And 6, continue to oppose overtaxation of families who are already stretched thin by increases in costs in every part of life. It's unusual for a freshman legislator to get bills passed, but several of my bills were passed, from health benefit legislation to the protection of the Farmington River. I've demonstrated my energy, commitment, and capability in the last 2 years, and I ask you to return me to the legislature to continue my work. Thank you.
Mr. Heahney.
I want to thank the citizens of Simsbury, or Simsbury Citizens First, for hosting these debates, as well as SCTV for being so kind as to film them and make them available to all the voters in Simsbury. As I come into this office, I bring 25 years of experience in service to this town. Service on our Planning Commission, service on our Board of Selectmen, service on our Board of Finance, and time as the Chairman of the Board of Finance. Why is that important? That's important because in the next 2 years, the state of Connecticut will face challenges like it has never faced before. We know today that we are looking at least an $800 million deficit for the present fiscal year, and probably larger deficits as we go into the subsequent years. We have to face those challenges with real answers, because they're real problems. They're not something you can do with an accounting adjustment. 2 years ago, the majority of Democrats passed an income tax increase when we had a $600 million surplus. If you're going to pass an income tax increase that would have taken $6 million out of Simsbury in a year with a $600 million surplus, I can guarantee you that they are going to move to have an income tax increase and maybe other tax increases as the solution for dealing with the present economic troubles. The problem with that is not a solution. It doesn't solve a problem. It aggravates a problem. It drives businesses and jobs out of our state. And we need to be very focused and understand that somebody needs to go from Simsbury to represent this town and say that is not the solution. We need to understand that taxes in a down economy are a very bad idea, just as trying to force through over Governor Rail's veto an increase in the minimum wage was a very bad idea that Linda supported. Our representative from Simsbury will need to understand that they have to look at the core obligations that the state faces and move those obligations and look at them and see how you deal with them. The number one expense that we face is employment costs and the benefit costs. And you have to be willing to go right at those costs and understand we need to reduce them. And when we had, in 1989, 1990, a huge reduction in funds from the state of Connecticut, as a part of the Board of Selectmen, I negotiated contract terms with our labor employees, and we found them as a partner to solve our problems. That's where Connecticut has to go. That's where we can solve the problem. And I ask the citizens of Simsbury for their vote to go do your work.
Part of tonight's debate includes questions, important questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to those questions. The first one includes education funding. Our student population has increased about 10% in the past 25 years, but education costs have more than doubled to nearly $9 billion statewide. There are many groups now pressuring local towns for tax relief, with more towns in our area seeing their budgets defeated as taxpayer groups gain ground. In addition, the formulas for education reimbursement to towns and cities appear inequitable. State education aid favors increased funding for the least successful systems and less funding for the systems that have shown success. What are your answers to the problems of funding quality education equitably without breaking the backs of taxpayers? And we're going to start this with Ms. Deborah Noble.
Thank you. I think that probably the most important part of that question to address at this juncture in time is how do we do this? How do we fund education in an equitable manner without breaking the backs of taxpayers? Because that's really what's happening. The state is not contributing fully to the education cost-sharing grant, and we're depending too much on your property taxes to fund what is, for all intents and purposes, an excellent, excellent education system here in Simsbury. And it is. I know because I have a student in it, and I'm very glad that he goes to Simsbury High School. One way to alleviate the property tax burden on families and homeowners in Simsbury would be to double the property tax credit. It would also be to increase the levels at which we phase out the tax credit, and to lower the income tax on those earning less than $100,000. I cite all these examples as ways to alleviate the property tax burden that you spend on education, because all of these measures were in House Bill 7400, which was a budget bill back in 2007, and State Representative Linda Scofield voted against it. It's very unfortunate. The one part of this bill that I found to be most helpful was that it would have increased taxes on those families earning over $250,000. Perhaps that's why she voted against it. There is no easy solution to education. There is no easy solution to equitable education. That's why Sheff versus O'Neill was brought about, and that's why it's still being fought in the courts. I think that we all need to pool our resources so that every child in Connecticut gets an equitable and decent education without overburdening taxpayers. Thank you.
Mr. Kalechman.
You know, my opponent, Mr. Heahney, mentioned at the first debate that Hartford is a recipient of $6,000 per student. And he indicated that the town of Simsbury sends to Hartford, and it's dispensed $6,000 per student in Hartford. And Simsbury, District 16, is given $1,000 per student. Now, we're here again, what we're faced with, and you'll be told that my opponents brought the money to Simsbury for education. And the Democratic opponent will tell you how much she brought, and she brought more than the other fellow. What I'm here to tell you is that the Democratic chair from the House of Representatives, Andy Fleischman, and the Democratic chair from the Senate, Gaffney, they're the fellows that are dispensing the funding for education, and we're not getting our fair share. Andy is seeing to the big cities, and Mr. Gaffney is seeing to the big cities. And our city, we don't get anything. And it's time to change it, because the Democrats are not serving you. And it's time for you to realize it. You're not being served by the Democratic Party. You're being taken to the cleaners. It's a tax and spend party.
Ms. Scofield.
Thank you. I'll just take a second to respond to a few of the accusations made here. It's sort of funny because I have one person saying that I will raise taxes because I'm a Democrat, and another complaining that I didn't raise taxes. So
I'm not
just to be
complaining
clear,
that you
we're
didn't
doing
raise
everything.
taxes.
I did vote against the bill that Ms. Noble mentioned because it would have cost Simsbury taxpayers $15 million more in taxes. Yes, we would have gotten back $2 million more in education funds, but I didn't think that was a good deal for Simsbury. And ultimately, what we did was get the $2 million without the $15 million taxes. So that, I thought, was a good deal for Simsbury schools. We need to continue to bring in education funding in the same fashion. We need to make sure that our costs in Simsbury are managed. Part of the way to do that is to make sure that we at the state are not passing unfunded mandates on the school and giving them encouragement to regionalize services and costs where possible. I think we've been effective in getting more funding for ECS in the last 2 years in particular. I'm having to move quickly here. I think we also need to demand better accountability from schools that we fund outside of Simsbury. Big part of our taxes goes to funding schools elsewhere. Many of those schools are failing. We need to help those schools. Kids will come, our future workforce, 40% of it's going to come from our cities. We need to make sure that kids in the cities are getting a good education. But we need to make sure that the funding follows the student. At this point, when we have kids that come from the city to from Hartford to here, we get far less in Simsbury in funding than Hartford gets, even though they don't have that student anymore. The money should follow the student. There's a problem there. So we need to get better funding for Project Choice. We also need a better funding solution for our special education so that both the town and the state have a stake in working together to manage those costs and make sure that we have the best outcome for kids with special needs. Thank you.
Mr. Heahney.
Let me say first that we have a great education system here in Simsbury. I'm very proud to be a graduate of Simsbury High. My wife Barbara, who's here with me tonight, is also a graduate of Simsbury High. And our four children, 3 have graduated from Simsbury High and 1's a senior. And so we've seen every step of the way what a wonderful education system it provides to our families here in Simsbury. When I was chairman of the Board of Finance, I saw what a huge problem the ECS formula, the education funding formula, was causing for towns like Simsbury. It's not a fair formula. It was even worse then than it is today. And when I became elected state representative in the 8 years I was in, I made that a priority. I went on the education committee and I stayed the entire time. I was ranking member for 4 years, and I made the ECS formula and its fallacies, its problems, my main issue. And one of the things we accomplished was to remove what was probably the most onerous provision in that formula that said you cannot have more than 6% increase in any given year, no matter how much you're entitled to under the formula. You're stuck at 6%. We got rid of that, and what has that done for Simsbury? Since that's gone out, we've increased the annual funding $3 million. If that 6% was still in, we'd be getting $2.5 million less a year, every year, because we accomplished that change, and I take personal credit for that change. We have increased our situation. But as Mr. Kalechman pointed out, and his numbers were wrong, but his point is correct, Hartford gets $8,500 a student, and Simsbury gets a little over $1,000. That is not a fair formula. That's unreasonable. And we need, because this is a constitutional obligation of the state of Connecticut to pay for our children's education, to ensure that somebody's going to go fight to see that formula is made fair for Simsbury, as I did during my 8 years.
Our next question is constitution changes, and again, each candidate has 2 minutes to respond. In many states, citizens can place initiatives directly on the ballot by collecting petition signatures. This November, voters will be deciding on a proposal to reopen the state constitution so that a system of a direct initiative can be adopted in Connecticut. Do you support a direct ballot initiative for Connecticut, and why? We're going to start with Mr. Kalechman.
At the last debate, I indicated that I was against any constitutional change in the Connecticut Constitution. At my interview at the Hartford Courant, I was the only candidate at that interview that mentioned the constitutional question. I mentioned the fact that it would be on the ballot, and it's to be on the ballot, and it's to be right at the very top. And the question will be, shall there be a constitutional convention to amend or revise the Constitution of the United States? What that means is, should they get together to change the Constitution of the, of the state of Connecticut? I stand corrected. It's the Constitution of the state of Connecticut. Should they get together to change the Constitution of the state of Connecticut? My position all along has been no. Now, let me tell you one reason why I don't feel it should be opened. We have a great Constitution. It happens to be stronger than the United States Constitution in many ways. But one way I'd like to point out to you is in Article 1st, that every citizen may freely speak, write, publish his sentiments on all subjects, being responsible for the abuse of that liberty. In other words, that freedom of speech is stronger than the First Amendment in the United States Constitution. Any history teacher will tell you that. And why do we want to open it up for groups to come along and start changing the way they want to do? Case in point, our Supreme Court...
Time is up. Sorry. We want to move on now to Ms. Scofield. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, at first blush, I think it sounds like an appealing idea to return power directly to the people, but there are many hidden dangers in opening up the Constitution. The danger is that anything in the Constitution can be changed by a constitutional convention. For example, our Constitution protects the rights of women, the mentally ill, and disabled persons. These are rights that are not protected in the federal Constitution. So if we changed it in the state Constitution, these people have no backup, no fallback for protection. Let me clarify that voting for this constitutional convention does not guarantee that referenda will be adopted as a result. It just guarantees that there'll be a group of people that get together and discuss the Constitution, and they can decide anything that they want to change, any proposals that they want to make, and then that has to come back for a full public vote. If you assume that you get those referenda passed, I can tell you I lived in Oregon where we did have those ballot initiatives on ballots, and you end up with special interests spending way more money trying to affect the public than they do even trying to affect the legislature. And so I think they actually wind up with more power than they would through a deliberative body. We got barraged with TV ads and mail and all sorts of stuff, and really whoever had the most money won. And a lot of their ads were misleading. A lot of the questions were very complicated. Ballot questions can be really things that trample on the rights of the minority. In Nevada, for example, there's currently a ballot question to add a tax on people of upper income, and anyone who leaves the state would have 55% of their assets seized if they tried to leave. I mean, bizarre ballot question, but that's what's there. We have a representative government because our founding fathers recognized that decisions should be made by a deliberative body, a group of people who take the time to listen to testimony and challenge it before they make their decision.
It is time.
We should stick with that.
Now, finally, we move on to Ms. Noble. Oh, I'm sorry,
no,
Mr.
Mr.
Heahney, I'm
Heahney.
sorry.
Mr. Hague.
Sorry about that.
I support the concept of direct ballot initiatives. Our Constitution is well drafted, it's very reasonable, but I believe in democracy. And direct ballot initiatives say that the public can vote on things that are of interest and concern to them. It's not anyone's idea. Each ballot initiative must meet an initial threshold and must be done in a way that is appropriate, that demonstrates significant public support. Ballot initiatives should be focused on broad issues of public concern. And all of these things, given the experiences in over 30 states that have direct ballot initiatives, could be well built into our Constitution. The last time we had an initiative in Connecticut was where the voters voted for a balanced budget. And part of that initiative said, well, the legislature will have to implement it with implementing legislation. And you know, that's over 10 years ago, and it's never been done. And that constitutional cap that was put into effect has been abused for 12 years now. The vote of the public of this state has been abused, and no one has been able to do a thing. I ran bills to try to implement the cap, and they would run around them. They wouldn't take them up. You wouldn't get a public hearing. The public needs to be able to take direct initiative, and anyone who thinks the public doesn't have enough sense to vote for good ideas and to reject bad ideas, I would have a concern about. I think we should vote yes on this so that we have direct ballot initiative and bring the power to the people to run this state on major issues the way they'd like it.
And now we go to Ms. Noble.
Thank you. To put this in the very, very simplest of terms, a direct ballot initiative would mean that an individual out there or a group of individuals out there with an axe to grind and enough money can push forth their own agenda and buy their own law. That's really what this can turn into, and that is in the very simplest of terms. And I don't see any reason that we need to open up that can of worms, because there are those groups out there, and the money certainly is there behind them. We have a group in Connecticut right now who is trying to push forth this direct ballot initiative. I firmly believe that they're doing it out of ignorance, bias, and prejudice. I do not support this direct ballot initiative at all and opening up the Constitution. We do have a representative form of government. You have public hearings, you have public debates, as we see here tonight. You have the ability to petition the government on many different levels. I don't think that this is a good idea, and I will be voting against it when I go into the voting booth on November 4th.
Our next question concerns energy. With the need to increase access to energy resources, it is vital that we collectively work to address the issues of energy diversification and conservation in order to reduce costs. The combination of a steep and continuing increase in energy prices with the looming inadequacy of energy supplies significantly inhibits the state's ability to maintain a strong economy and to retain and recruit businesses. What types of initiatives would you support? And we're going to start this question with Ms. Scofield.
Thank you. Our economy and our business prosperity have always been tied to the availability of cheap, reliable energy. But we do need to change our ways. The days of cheap fossil fuel are over. So we really need to start planning for this reality with a comprehensive energy plan and look first to conservation for short-term relief and alternative fuels for near-term relief. We did pass an energy bill a couple of years ago that included incentives for conservation, sales tax exemptions for energy-efficient cars, subsidies for solar, incentives for distributed energy generation, peak meters, new transmission lines to cut federal congestion costs, and new generation plants, among many other provisions. We also passed bills in August to assist with winter heating bills. It includes not only help for the actual fuel costs, but also assistance in making your house more energy efficient. But for the future, we've got to invest in alternative fuels, continue to promote conservation efforts in a big way, and make sure that we provide a safety net for vulnerable low-income folks. Connecticut is a chief place of research related to fuel cell technology. We should be promoting that not only because it's good for business, but also there's real potential there to help us with our energy problems. We need to push the power distributors like CL&P to buy electricity directly from power generators, skipping the middlemen who add so much cost to our electricity. We need to allow for CL&P and power distributors like them to negotiate longer contracts. Right now, they're constrained in how long they can have a contract, which makes their costs higher. Then they would be able to have more competitive rates if they could do that. I'm about to get cut off, so I'll stop there.
Ms. Noble? No, I'm sorry, I
The
can't
other
read
guy
it.
in the end.
Mr. Heahney, I'm so sorry. I should keep my glasses on.
It's the skirt.
I'm so petite down
Wait,
there.
You're hidden behind the pillar.
Yeah. Connecticut has the highest energy costs in the country. These costs cripple our businesses, our manufacturers, and they're burdening our families. They drive jobs out of the state, and they make it one of the reasons why Connecticut is so inhospitable to new business and new jobs. We provide financial incentives and have for years for all kinds of alternative energy production, wind, solar, many others. And yet each of us knows, as we sit here in Simsbury and watch the Farmington River gently go by, that the entire industrial revolution that developed here in Connecticut was as a result of water power. And yet we have no incentives for water power. In fact, it's so overregulated that you cannot take an existing dam like Collinsville and simply produce power on the existing sluiceways. This is something that we need to think about and say, why not? We have a clean, available energy that's simply flowing through our state, existing dams, I'm talking about building new dams, and we need to take advantage of it. We need to develop the technology to do it. Think of all the mill sites when you drive around the state that ran factories, large, powerful factories for years, and now are sitting idle. Those facilities are there. We have to have energy efficiency. We have to continue to invest in fuel cell technology where Connecticut is a leader. And by doing that, we create jobs for Connecticut citizens. And that's a place where we can be very successful. We've already reached a great level of success. Clean fuel cells and distributed power systems can be a great solution. But there are solutions that are Connecticut solutions that will bring jobs to the state and make us a much more energy efficient and
Time is up.
inexpensive state. Thank you.
Ms. Noble.
Thank you. Initially, I'd like to see the state of Connecticut create a green infrastructure policy. To date, no other state has done that. I think it would be a great way for Connecticut to lead the way towards a greener, more fuel-efficient environment. I think we should foster state and local partnerships to encourage a well-designed public transportation system and transit system, to establish communities and within new community development, provide tax incentives to encourage the production of clean fuels and solar power and biodiesel plants in Connecticut, provide grant funding for renewable energy research and demonstration projects, provide more low-interest loans for households when these households are replacing old, inefficient boilers and furnaces. I myself was able to purchase a new boiler many years ago, a more fuel-efficient boiler, through a loan through the USDA with a 1% interest rate. I see no reason why Connecticut couldn't get involved in something like that. And finally, I think we should provide more consumer rebates when individuals do buy more energy-efficient appliances, cars, and heating and cooling systems for their homes and businesses. Thank you.
Mr. Kalechman.
I know I'm not going to have enough time, but I'll attempt it anyway. Governor Jody Rell today announced that more than 18,000 Connecticut households have applied for winter heating assistance, more than triple the amount the state handled the same period last year, right? Why have we waited for so long? Where have the Democratic and Republican parties been? Mr. Heahney mentions that why didn't he do something when he was there? I'm yet to hear from the incumbent, but she'll tell you the same thing. She's gotten so much money for grants and energy. And they're right, as far as we pay more than anybody. We pay 6.2%. Let me ask the Democratic incumbent a question. Where does that money, that 24 cents that they hide on us, that the governor tried to release and the Democratic Party wouldn't? Mr. Amon stood up and said, it's a cheap shot. This was a year and a half ago. It's a cheap shot. And now we have people going to go cold unless these legislators, both the Democrats and the Republicans, have been remiss in their duties, and it's time for clearer heads to give other people an opportunity to get the thing going, right? We're dealing with people's lives now. It's no longer a joke, and it's no longer for cronies such as Senator Fonfara to go out with his heating oil and his furnace, his tricky furnace he's got going. And I said it, and I'm glad I said it, because changes have to be made in Hartford.
We're going to take a 5-minute break now, so you can get up and stretch your legs a little bit. When we come back after the break, there will be more questions, including some from residents in Simsbury and what's important to them. We'll see you then. We're going to start tonight's debate, part 2, after you've had a nice break, hopefully. And our next question is smart growth. On February 4th, 2008, the Connecticut Responsible Growth Task Force issued a report with 9 recommendations to Governor Rell. The task force, created by legislation, was charged with identifying responsible growth criteria to help guide the state's future investment decisions. However, in the end, there was no budget modifications. Bills died that would have created a state long-range planning oversight committee, a process, and ultimately a plan. A bill that would have defined responsible growth and created a responsible growth cabinet died. Proposals to fully fund pilots failed, and there was no new funding for brownfields. If elected, which specific smart growth initiatives would you advocate for? Mr. Heahney.
Thank you. Smart growth is one of those things that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's a catchphrase for differing kinds of views. Who could be against smart growth? I think we've had a lot of smart growth here in Simsbury, and as former member of the Planning Commission, I saw how dedicated people were to make sure that the developments we made and the improvements we made to our community were thoughtfully considered and put in place. As Ev Clark, the former chairman of the Planning Commission many years ago, used to say, you have to look at each development as if it's going to be there for 100 years. And if it passes that test, that you can be comfortable that it would be there for that period of time, then it's probably worth voting for. Smart growth has a number of factors, one of which is whether we should be cleaning up and reusing our brownfields. And I think that's one we should all be agreeing on. We have old factories around this state that have been sitting for 20 and 30 and 40 years because they have contamination. They should be cleaned up and put back to good, effective use. Smart growth is very important, and we have applied those principles here in Simsbury, and I trust our Simsbury land use representatives to make smart decisions in planning. But part of smart growth is to make regional decisions and have somebody from outside of Simsbury decide what buildings or projects should or should not go here. Frankly, I think we have a very good system. When we see something we don't like, the citizens turn out and make it clear that that's not something they want. I don't want that decision being made in the city of Hartford by officials that have never traveled out here. It's our decisions. It should be a local decision. Finally, smart growth can be implemented through towns and should be through our existing systems, and we should not shift capacity and power to others.
Thank you. Ms. Noble.
Thank you. I think that in order to have smart growth, we need to establish a comprehensive smart growth and responsible growth initiative that recognizes the destructive links we have between the present land use policies and property taxes. Present policies create incentives for sprawl, and none of us want that. And developments that devour our precious green space, waste taxpayer dollars for new infrastructures, and promotes a disinvestment in our urban centers. With regards to brownfields and brownfields reclamation, there are programs in place in Connecticut already. If you look out at the city of Waterbury, they have a brownfield remediation program that not only cleans up the brownfields out there, but also creates a job training program that provides well-paying jobs for low-income individuals in the Waterbury area. I say we expand that program throughout the entire state. And finally, I'd like to say that I do not believe in something called spot zoning. whereby you change the zoning, you pass laws that can change the zoning in one particular area. I think that sets a very bad precedent, and I would not support that. That is not smart growth.
Mr. Kalechman.
Roughly about 2 weeks ago, I attended a debate put on by the 1,000 Friends regarding smart growth in Connecticut. And I supported them, and I support smart growth. Smart growth, it's a buzzword. A lot of people use it to their advantage. We have a situation in Simsbury now where the Board of Selectmen are using smart growth to come in the back door with what they call a charrette. The people of Simsbury, people are intelligent enough. They don't need a representative to tell them how to think. They picked this project on Route 10. They picked it right up. They voted against it. And now we have the Board of Selectmen, the first selectman. She wants to come through the back door and spend $500,000, here again, tax and spend $500,000 of your dollars to do a charrette that the people don't want. And we have planning commissions, zoning commissions. We have a setup to handle that. So, I'm against what they call Jerseyfication of a highway, or Jerseyfication of a road like Route 10. And this is a Democratic ploy to come through the back door as far as that property on Route 10 goes. And I'm against it, and I'm on record. I support smart growth. And my opponents, what have they done? They haven't done one thing to advance smart growth in Connecticut. They'll tell you they have, but they haven't.
Time is up. Thank you. And finally, Ms. Scofield.
Thank you. Well, we live in a beautiful town, really blessed with a lovely landscape, and certainly something we all care about preserving. At the same time, we do want some responsible growth to help us with our tax base. So we have to work through the principles of smart growth to make sure that we can add to our tax base and keep the character of our town. That means projects that bring the highest level of tax, property tax generation, where we promote denser housing, building in walkable communities so that you can live downtown in a mixed-use kind of environment, walk to work, walk to a restaurant, walk to the stores in a village-type concept. We need to build along the transportation corridors and elect projects that help bring jobs. The report had a number of recommendations in it, and I'd like to pick up on a few of those and add to them. I think one thing we ought to think about doing is in town looking at fast-tracking projects that meet smart growth criteria in order to encourage that kind of growth. The legislature has created what's called the Face of Connecticut legislation. We haven't put enough funding into it. It's going to be a challenge in the coming couple of years because of the economy, but to help preserve open space and farmland, it's something that we need to continue to do, and Simsbury's been a beneficiary of some of that kind of initiative. We need the executive branch to better coordinate all of the different multiple state agencies that are involved in smart growth planning. We need to promote regionalization on some development. We talked at that debate we had in Canton about perhaps even considering ways of regionalizing revenue sharing and local planning to make sure that we're building things that benefit the entire region and not just a single town, without creating incentives for one town to compete for a shopping center that really doesn't want to have.
We will now go to questions submitted by Simsbury Citizens First website by residents. The candidates have not been given these questions in advance. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. The first question is, what is your position on universal health care coverage? And can a health care plan be implemented in these trying fiscal times? And we're going to start here with Ms. Noble.
Yes. Yes, of course I believe in universal health care. I speak from experience. I have no health care insurance. I work full-time. I work for an insurance company. I have no health care insurance. And due to the fact that my husband just got laid off from his job last Friday, he and my son also run the risk of losing their health care insurance by December. Not a very nice holiday gift to receive, is it?
No.
But that's the reality that people are facing in Connecticut each and every day. We are not part of the minority. We are part of the majority. More and more people every day are losing access to health care because they're losing access to health care insurance, and it's simply not right. We have to come up with a better system. We cannot keep throwing money at health insurance companies and tying health care to employment and insurance. It simply is immoral, it's unconscionable, and it doesn't work. We need to be more creative and create the municipal health care pooling bill. We need to have a single-payer system. We need universal health care, and we don't need it yesterday. We need it now. Thank you.
Mr. Kalechman.
In my position papers, at the last debate, I announced that I was for health care in Connecticut, and that everybody that was in Connecticut should be covered. And I'm not going to go into detail. I support it. Here again, I have the incumbent on my left and the Republican on my left. What have they done about it? They haven't done anything. Now, if we're frugal, we can provide this. But let me give you an idea of what my Democratic opponent is proposing. Rather than come out and say she's for universal health care for everybody, she's proposing 26-year-olds be kept on the taxpayers' dole until they're 26 years old to provide insurance for them. If that money was given to people like Ms. Noble and other people, they could buy insurance for their family. But she's turning around, she wants to insure people going to college until they're 26 years old. What is she going to do? Is she going to keep them on the dole until they're 50? Until they, don't they leave their mother's apron strings? And this is a proposal that she has. And one thing I like to add, and the senator from the Insurance Commission, Kisco, right? He has no integrity. He tried to he defrauded the state of $85,000 in public campaign financing funds. They caught him at it. They denied him the funds. And to this day, he hasn't been indicted. And he's running for senator of the state of Connecticut from Bridgeport. It's a fact. Check with the Election Enforcement Commission.
Ms. Scofield.
Thank you. Healthcare is a very important issue and one that's near and dear to my heart because I've worked in this field for the last 30 years of my life, more than 30 years. And I absolutely believe that everybody should have access to affordable health benefits. I support a health reform approach, and in fact, I have a multi-page, 120-page bill that I introduced with a lot of detail in it that addresses the health reform approach that I support, which is a market-based approach. It includes providing basic benefits that are more affordable to everyone through a connector and a Massachusetts-style project, tax incentives for employers to offer their low-wage workers with benefits, sliding scale subsidies for premiums for low-income folks, Medicaid expansions for the poorest, and quality improvement and cost containment initiatives through a public-private partnership. I believe we absolutely have to keep working on this issue. I did get passed, it's not just a proposal, but actually legislation that did pass and is going into effect this January that enables 26-year-olds to stay on their parents' insurance plan. It's not a public dole, but it is an option for parents to keep their children insured because so many kids are in college part-time or just getting out of college and they don't have benefits yet because they're in their waiting period, or they don't have a job yet, or they're just low-wage workers and can't afford it. So this is a private sector solution. It doesn't create a new public program. It's a private sector solution that enables families to take care of their young adult children. I also worked on supporting a bill that enables small employers and municipal organizations to buy their insurance through the comptroller's plan. And again, running out of time, so I can't describe that, but there are a number of initiatives that I have backed and will continue to support and push for.
Thank you. Mr. Heahney?
Thank you. About 90% of the people in Connecticut have health care. We have a 10% gap, a 10% problem that needs to be resolved. And it's not by creating a Canadian-style universal healthcare system that we're going to have a solution. I believe we need to continue down the path of, as we did with Husky A and Husky B, and making those expanded. And with the governor's new initiatives, we have opportunities to take that gap and eliminate it. It's not easy. We need different solutions for different strata within that 10%. And it's going to take a lot of hard work and thoughtfulness as to how we do it. Now, Linda says she's for one kind of plan, but she voted for another kind of plan. On March 13th in 2007, she voted for Senate Bill 1371. That vote was a vote to increase spending in Connecticut by $17.7 billion. Double the state budget. It was a universal Canadian-style health care plan that would cost between $4,000 and $6,000 per person and would cover the 3 million people of the state of Connecticut. She voted for it. She tells you she's doing something else, but that's what she was for. To spend between 11 and 17 billion additional dollars means every tax that you pay has to double. The entire revenue of the state of Connecticut has to double to meet this bill. I don't agree for it. She voted for it. It's a big difference between us. This is where the Democratic Party wants us to go. Universal health care, single payer, $17.7 billion. I say no.
Thank you. And the final question. As you know, Connecticut ranks near the top of the list of states with the highest cost of living. This fact, coupled with an increasingly competitive job market, has created a climate in which young people, namely recent college graduates, cannot afford to start families, participate in their communities, or worse, continue living in Connecticut. As a result, many are fleeing the region in search of an economic climate more favorable to young people. If elected, what will you do to ensure young residents remain in our state and have an opportunity to thrive? And we'll start this question with Mr. Kalechman.
That's not a hard thing to do. I don't think you have to give anybody incentives as far as why they should stay. I don't think you have to pay their education to ask them to stay. I don't think you have to give them money to ask them to stay. After all, we have these youngsters that volunteer to put their lives in harm's way each and every day. They don't go for money. They go for the country. And the same thing, these youngsters coming out of school, these youngsters graduating from both the technical schools and the colleges, they're not looking for anything. The only thing they're looking for a good job and security. And if we can provide security and good jobs, we don't have to give them anything. And we've been remiss in our duties by allowing the Democratic Party tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend. Why is it in Connecticut we spend twice the property tax than any other state in the union? We spend twice the property tax than any other state in the union. Why is that? Because they're down there in Hartford, tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend. I can remember when I was a youngster, the legislature, they served because they wanted to do something for their state. Now they're all down there drawing $10,000, $20,000 a year and asking for more. They're making a career out of being a representative. It's time for everything to stop. It's time for the people to wake up and say, look, we need a change. And the thing is, you're getting lip service from the Democratic Party, lip service from the Republican Party. It's time to make a change. I'm that change. I'm a petitioning candidate. I'll represent you in Hartford. I'll represent you, not the political party, and I won't go to a caucus to name this one the speaker and that one the speaker.
Time is up. Next, we go to Ms. Scofield.
Thank you. Well, we have heard many studies about kids leaving. What I think does get, and that's a tough thing for families. When you want your kid to get out of college, you want to keep them close so that you can have your family life continue. But one of the things that I think doesn't get reflected in a lot of those studies is that there are also studies showing that many not quite so young adults come back to Connecticut, because Connecticut's a great place to raise a family. So we're not as bad as we think. I think the key thing that we need to recognize is that kids need jobs, as Mr. Kalechman said. We need to make sure that there's jobs and affordable housing for kids to attract them to stay here immediately after college. But I can tell you, I know many young people who had job offers and affordable housing and went to places like Boston and San Francisco, which is much more expensive to live than here. And they went because Boston and San Francisco are fun places to live. I think one of the things that we really need to do, and this ties into the smart growth principles, is make our cities a more vibrant and exciting place to live. And you do that by building housing and entertainment, restaurants and theater and everything downtown, and having those walkable communities. Young people like to live where there's lots of action going on in the city. And then they'll move back out to the suburbs like Simsbury once they want to raise their children. So I think that smart growth is actually a key issue here, along with making sure that there are jobs and reasonably priced rents for our children. We provide a terrific education system here, both in higher and primary education. So kids get a terrific start, and they have lots of job opportunities available to them across the country. But again, I think we've got to work on making our cities a livable, enjoyable place to be.
Mr. Heahney.
This is not an easy problem. As a father, I have my son right in front of me, 26 years old, graduated from UConn, he stayed in Connecticut, he started his own business, and I'm very proud of him. I have a daughter who graduated from college, and she's living in Miami, and she found opportunity there. And if we talk to all of their friends, many are here in Connecticut, but many have gone around the country and found other places. But the thing that you will find as the commonality between all of these young people is if there are jobs that they see as giving them a career and an opportunity to advance themselves, they want to be there. And Connecticut needs to be such a state. It's not. It's not that kind of state. It's not about having a few more bars or a couple of restaurants or some state-sponsored entertainment. It's about employment opportunities that lead to careers that bring to these young people a belief that they can make a life here in Connecticut where they can buy a home and then raise a family when the time comes, but they can make it here with opportunities, and it starts with jobs. And that's where the state has failed. They haven't created the employment opportunities for these young people who've come out of college. We pay a lot of money to the University of Connecticut to subsidize our students there and in the CSU system, and over 50% of them finish their education, grab their degree, get in their car and leave the state because there aren't opportunities for them to go to work and build a career here. We need to change that factor. It's about the jobs that lead to a career, that lead to a success, a belief that they can make their life here. And they see it in other states, they don't see it here. We need to change that dynamic and let it create so they can work here and live here and stay here.
Thank you. And for our last, we go to Ms. Noble.
Thank you. Well, this is quite a loaded question. I have lived in many other areas besides Simsbury. I've lived throughout the entire state of Connecticut. I spent a period of time in New York. I've lived out west. But still, I came back here, and I came back to Connecticut because it is a wonderful quality of life, and it is a place that I want to raise my family, and I'm very fortunate that my children have all stayed close to me. They find a good education here, but again, the well-paying jobs are not there. We need to invest more money in higher education so that our students can get that education and stay here, and we have to make sure that the jobs that they're getting educated for are here in Connecticut. The technologies are here in Connecticut. We have the ability to do that. We have to create much more affordable housing. Housing costs in Connecticut have skyrocketed over the last few decades, and many people cannot afford those so-called starter homes for $250,000 in Simsbury. It's ridiculous to expect someone just out of college to afford something like that. Rents are through the roof. We have some very poor cities. Some of the poorest cities in the country, while we have the highest cost of living, are here in Connecticut. We do not invest enough in our urban areas and encourage people to live there. There's so many ways to fix Connecticut and make it a much more palatable place to live. We need to work together and invest in regionalism to create a better public transportation system so that people will stay. That is the one thing I hear from everybody, particularly in eastern Connecticut, is that you can't get from here to there, ever. There's so many ways to fix the problem and stop people from leaving Connecticut. I know if we work together, we can do it.
Thank you. And finally, with all the questions now being asked and answered, each candidate will have exactly 3 minutes for their closing statements. And we're going to start the closing statements with Mr. Heahney.
I want to again thank Simsbury Citizens First and SCTV for sponsoring this event and these the two debates, and particularly for SCTV for also publishing it, making sure it's available, not only apparently on their website, but also on the TV channel itself. This November 4th, I ask the voters of Simsbury for their support. I ask you for your vote. I do so with the belief that my experience, my 8 years in the legislature, my time with the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen here in Simsbury, as well as the Planning Commission, all of those things are adapted entirely to the needs we have today. That level of knowledge of how our community operates is what's going to be needed at the state capitol as they face the many, many challenges that are going to be brought on by an $800 million or $1 billion deficit in this year, and probably as much in the year after. That experience gives me great knowledge in understanding how these things, how challenges are faced, and that the simple solution of tax increases is not the solution that we need to move forward. It would make Connecticut less competitive in bringing jobs, and we know for a fact we need to bring jobs to Connecticut. We need to make Connecticut a place that employers want to come, not flee from. If you think about your everyday life here in Connecticut, when the alarm goes off in the morning to wake you up, you begin paying a tax on your electricity to run that alarm. You get in and you take a shower, and the gas that's heating your water you're being taxed on. You get in to go to work, and you're paying a tax to run your car to work. All day, every day, you're paying taxes. Hidden, some of them hidden within other things, some of them right in your face. Sales tax on everything you buy. Obviously an income tax when you take that check home, they've taken their cut. I think the people of Connecticut are overtaxed. I believe that Simsbury needs an advocate now that is someone who will fight tax increases and has shown a record of holding down spending and trying to fight for tax relief for the citizens of Connecticut and particularly for Simsbury. With your support, I will take that view. If you want someone to fight taxes, I'm the person to vote for. And I ask for you to think carefully about where we're going as a state and as a nation and say, do you think you need to pay more taxes? I don't think that's the answer. The answer is to vote for Rob Heahney for less taxes and to put a stop in reasonable government. Thank you.
Ms. Scofield.
Thank you. I'm an independent thinker. I welcome input from diverse parties before I make decisions, especially from my constituents. I listen to and work with members of both parties. I've risked the wrath of my own party by voting in ways that sometimes they don't like, because I believe that I need to reflect the needs of the district that I was elected to represent. In the last 2 years of campaigning and being your state representative, I've listened to a lot of Simsbury residents. I've personally knocked on doors on almost every street in this town, and I've received correspondence from hundreds and hundreds of people. I can tell you that the majority of the people like me believe that there's a middle ground on most issues, and that our most pressing issue now is the economy, getting business to create jobs and keeping the state budget affordable. This election, I have candidates running on both my left and my right, and they're already trying to portray me in opposite directions that may cancel each other out as we head into the final weeks of the campaign. One saying I'm too liberal, one saying I'm too conservative, attacking me with half-truths that stretch credulity, such as the notion that I support a single-payer government-run healthcare system. I'm not going to engage in that type of negative campaign tactic. Sniping that we've seen at the federal level for the presidential campaign is, I think, inappropriate in Simsbury. We're not running for president. The truth is that I'm a centrist. The most important label about me, however, is that I'm effective. I've produced results getting legislation passed to expand affordable benefit options for families and small businesses, increasing education funds and open space funding for Simsbury, expanding our long-term care options for seniors, advancing the protection of our Farmington River. And I have done these things without voting for any tax increases. I have a significant contribution yet to make in the next 2 years as we face a difficult economy and need an effective voice to develop reasonable approaches to promote prosperity and well-being for everyone at every level of income in the state. I will continue to promote job growth, find ways to increase access to affordable health care, protect our environment, obtain funding for Simsbury schools, and keep the lid on taxes. I ask that you return me to office with your vote on November 4th. And I'd like to repeat that I do have a website, www.lindascofield.org, and there's a section on that website called Myths. So if you hear things that sound a little strange or hard to believe, check them out on my website, because they may not be believable. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kalechman.
Oh, there she goes again. She tells you one thing, and she means just the opposite. On November 4th, 2008, the election, Simsbury, you'll be asked to make a change. You'll be asked if you want to stay where you are now, where they told you they were going to go to Hartford and they were going to solve the budget problem. They were going to lower the taxes. We now face an $800 million deficit in the Connecticut budget. It started out with $300 million. It's up to $800 million. And before people are sent to Hartford, they call back the legislature, it's probably going to be up to $100 million, over $100 million. And it's the same old answers. They're going to solve the same problem: tax and spend, tax and spend. And you're facing a problem and you don't realize what you're facing. You're going to pay the tax, and the Democratic Party, through caucuses, are going to give that money to Hartford, New Haven, Waterbury, Stamford. The large cities are going to get the money. That's how the Democratic Party is set up in caucus. Do you know how a caucus works, whether it's Republican or Democrat? You sit in a caucus and you tell them how you're going to vote. So for her to sit here and tell me that she voted against taxes, they said, good, you can vote any way you want. We have the votes to do what we want. We have the Democratic votes. But when they needed her vote, she voted with them. and that's proof of the pudding. If you send her back to Hartford, and yet they need that vote for taxes, she's going to vote tax and spend. Now, I'll leave you with one thought, right? Hartford, the administration has closed the state veterans hospitals and cut the veterans' budgets. Your taxes, electricity, and water bills have gone up. There's no question about that. She can't say to me, it's a myth. It's not a myth. All your taxes have gone up. Your electric gone up. Your water bill has gone up. And it's costing you more. Are you better off now than what you were 2 or 4 years ago? Change. They're promising change. 2 years ago, she promised us she was going to lower the taxes and things would change. And they told us things would change in Washington. Not one thing has changed. The only thing that's changing in Washington is they have a new personality, and they're hoodwinking you again by saying, vote Democratic, everything's going to be hunky-dory. There's no...
Time is up. And finally, Ms. Noble.
Thank you. And thank you to Simsbury Citizens First for holding the second debate. Thank you to all the candidates sitting here to my left. It's very nice to see them all again and to hear their points of view. I appreciate it very much. And thank you to all of you again, and Susan Raff for moderating tonight. I'm looking forward to the next 2.5 weeks. I think it's going to be a very exciting time, not just here in Simsbury, obviously, but all across the country and all across the world. But over the next 2 years, we have to realize that we're going to face a new generation of challenges. We all have our doubts and our concerns. We're all concerned about the housing and the foreclosure crisis, health care or the lack thereof, our increasing reliance on foreign oil and how to alleviate that, and obviously taxes as well. However, in the face of despair, I believe that we can find hope. Because the founders of this country designed a system of government that was meant to change with the times. And we have a chance to change history, and we have a chance to do it right here in Simsbury, Connecticut. I am the very first third-party candidate to qualify for the Public Campaign Financing Grant. What that means, in the simplest of terms, is I am not a candidate of corporate America. I am not a candidate of a massive political machine. I am not a candidate of political action committees, and I am not a candidate of lobbyists. I am a candidate for the residents of Simsbury. When I am elected, I will be your public servant and not beholden to anyone else other than the residents of this town. I would consider it an honor and a privilege to serve all of you. And I too have a website that I expect to be up shortly. It's titled Deb for Simsbury, because I am. Thank you and good night.
I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Hopefully this was a good opportunity in this debate and some of the questions asked and answered to understand the candidates, learn more about them and where they stand on the issues. As you know, the election is November 4th. The deadline to register by mail is October 21st. You can also register in person at your town hall, and that date is October the 28th. And on that day, town halls will be staying open later from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. so that you can get in there and register. So we hope to see you at the polls, and thank you for coming out tonight.
I would also like to thank Susan Raff, our moderator this evening, for an excellent job keeping us all engaged and keeping everybody on track. I'd like to thank the candidates for participating a second time in this debate. I think it served the voters well to hear you speak directly about the issues. I'd also like to thank the residents who submitted questions to the website. It was great to have some questions and see what's on people's minds. So thank you all again, and you can watch this on the simsburytv.org or on Channel 5 SCTV. Thank you.